Alhamdulillah, and it gives me immense pleasure to be with you all today. The title of my paper is Different Shades of Sociology, the Rationale for Dalit Perspective. It was sparked, the title or the paper which I wanted to read, or when I started writing this paper, it was sparked by an article by Alvin Goldman, and his paper, I think it's a very famous paper, must have read by everyone, 1961. He wrote the Myth of Value-Free Sociology. So while reading that paper, I was really convinced that there is a case for, whether there is a case for value-free sociology. And I want to quote him to begin my paper, which was very revealing when I was reading this article, and I quote, "The value-free sociology doctrine is useful both to those who want to escape from the world and those who want to escape into it. It is useful for those young or not so young, men who live off sociology rather than for it, and those who think of sociology as a way of getting ahead in the world by providing them with neutral techniques that may be sold on the open market." So it's a long quotation, but to cut the long story short, I can conclude with this remark that indeed some sociologists have no hesitation about doing market research designed to sell more cigarettes, although well aware of the implication of recent cancer research. In brief, the value-free doctrine of social science was sometimes used to justify the sale of one's talent to the highest bidder, and is in contemporary version most ancient sophistry. Now, this is something which kept on haunting me, that really there is something called value-free in sociology or not. And then I started teaching a paper on methodology of social sciences. And in that paper, I saw that, initially when sociology grew in different parts of the world and in different countries, I saw that there was some particular perspective which was ingrained, and that started developing with the sociology. So I looked at 7 shades of sociology. There may be many, but I started looking 7 shades of sociology with specific perspectives in the initial years of establishment. So we can imagine, I have taken it from Raymond Aron. Raymond Aron starts by highlighting that at least two school of sociology which he highlights. One is American sociology and another is Russian sociology. And then I take from Ted Burton. Ted Burton, his book on philosophical foundation of 3 sociologies, 1977, he has talked about how, to begin with, how French sociology was dominated by positivism. And why it was dominated by positivism was because of the Newtonian physics model which dominated France at that time. So philosophically, Newtonian physics dominated. Out of that, empiricism and positivism were born in French sociology. But German sociology was different, which was led by Cartesian dualism, and because of that, Kant, Dilthey and Rickert started looking after, and then we have hermeneutics and interpretative understanding dominating the German sociology. But in America, we saw that reformism was much more dominant trend, and of course functionalism came later. Russian sociology was of course dominated by Marxian strand, and evolutionism prevailed in British sociology. But when we come to Asia, specifically after Second World War, and this is Japanese sociology, when I start looking Japanese sociology, there's a paper, the term is known as Shakai Iskirion. Shakai Iskirion is a special type of consciousness, and we can definitely look into it, that how they gave up most of the Western theories. They just discarded most of the Western theories, and they went on to what sociological imagination of C. Wright Mills will say. They went on to harp on raw empiricism, and they collected data from the field, lots of data they collected from the field, and then they started looking and understanding their society. So how this whole Western theory is being discarded is another strand of sociology which we get in Asia, and especially I'm talking about Japanese sociology. The last strand, you can look into Indian sociology in its inception. We have domination of Indology, and Carol Upadhyay bails us out that how Ghure's sociology, that is Hindu sociology of Ghure, that's what she writes. Now, you can see that it is basically not only that these sociology prevailed, these different strands of sociology prevailed in different types of, in different countries, but there were also critique of these sociologies. For example, I'm reminded of American sociology, which was critiqued by the blacks of that. And I'm using black deliberately because they themselves have used this identity for themselves. And therefore, I don't want to be, politically incorrect in that way. So the book, a booklet, edited volume, which came in 1973, Death of White Sociology. Death of White Sociology prompted a critique of American sociology, and on number of pertexts. I will just quote one or two, then I'll move on. One critique, the first critique of American sociology, which was developed by the blacks at that time, in the book, The Death of White Sociology, was that they argued that sociology has been, it has been basically stigmatizing for them. It has stigmatized the Afro-Americans, the white sociology, and they are not using, they are not using European, they are using the term white directly. So the white sociology has stigmatized Afro-Americans. The second, the critique of the death of white sociology provided by Afro-American was that it gives them an alternative to understand race, class, and to a lesser extent gender. That is another aspect of critique. The third critique which emerges was that whether the experiential reality is should be condemned, or is it a hurdle in production of knowledge, whether experience. And this comes from Kenneth Clark. Kenneth Clark wrote a wonderful text on life at Harlem, and you all know Harlem. His title of the book was Dark Ghetto. How his experience as a lifetime resident of Harlem shaped his view, and he also noted that his prior experience enhanced the scholarship rather than retarding the understanding of that area. So similarly, Joyce A. Lander has written about the women experience, black women experience, tomorrow's tomorrow, and she also feels the same, that experiences have enhanced his scholarship, her scholarship, rather than retarding her understanding. The fourth critique has been dealt by W.E. Du Bois, and W.E. Du Bois is a very celebrated book. His celebrated book is The Soul of Black Flock, and he says that the black basically live in a dilemma of double consciousness. One, the consciousness of America, and another is consciousness of black. So how can we really cope up with this? Now, we can go on, but I think this is an important critique of the American sociology. In one of the essays, that what is black sociology, when they started actually how to begin black sociology, one of the writers argued that the whole white sociology, even the father of world sociology, that is father of sociology, Auguste Comte, has a racist concept. This is the allegation directly, and he says that Comte believed that the sociologist must turn to ordinary historical works for his data. It was possible for him to ignore the history of non-European people because, he said, and I quote, the sociologist is interested only in those people who have experienced social progress. So if social progress is there, then definitely you can collect the data from there. And therefore, he says that most of the sociologists of white variety, as what they said, that starting from Auguste Comte, Herbert Spencer, Giddings, William Graham Sumner, they all have produced a very, very racist type of concepts without taking experiences of the blacks into consideration. And therefore, there is a need for different sociology. Having given you this, apart from this racial prejudice, as has been highlighted by the Afro-American, American sociology has also seen the critique of the European concepts by another person called Gordon Morgan. Gordon Morgan has produced a wonderful work, and he begins by arguing that, look, we are not looking at the crisis of sociology. Why are we not ready to accept that there is a crisis in sociology? And especially, he argues that the type of conceptual tools which we have to understand the reality that do not match the reality of the country where it is being taught. And therefore he says that, and I quote from him, the feudalistic model of order which supported a large variety of social positions began to be taught in American colleges when sociology was imported from Europe. Although America was more dynamic than Europe of the feudal period, it was the feudal model that gained currency, and it has held the grip up of the present time. So whatever the concept came from Europe, that has been still that has been overpowering the American society, though American society have been dynamic. And what he was talking about, that he treats that European sociology was more static in nature, and even then this has happened. Therefore, the present writings, argues Morgan, that a new sociology, indeed mainly because of the theory bequeathed by the European predecessors, is largely inapplicable to the American conditions. The categorical and static thought of the feudal age of Europe that provided the model for European thought could not be applied to the fullest advantage of America, where the change was rapid, that the tradition stood little chance to be developed. So we can observe that there is a racial critique of the white sociology, and here even whites have criticized the European sociology, that look, they are not value free, they are value loaded. Last but not the least, there is very recent there is a very recent text by edited volume by Wallenstein, Rodrigues and others, decolonizing European sociology. Decolonizing European sociology. And they argue that the European sociology has been colonized by white European erudite males. That is what allegation they have put. White European sociology has been colonized by white erudite males. It tries to, now this book is trying to actually explain and expose the conventional European genealogy of thought and relieving the national boundaries as a liberation point of knowledge, that look, Western modernity out of which sociology has grown, that is not the correct way to look modernity, because modernity has different spaces. Modernity emerged out of different ways in different countries, and in different spaces modernity has taken different shape. And they gave example that how French modernity when emerged, what type of revolution there, and how the when colonialists started marching on the path of modernity, what path did they treat? So there are different versions, and therefore, friends, what happens that this gives me strength to talk about that how value-free sociology is taking a beating. And value-free sociology is a very, very ticklish, or it is a very ticklish epithet, or it is a very ticklish methodological underpinning how to suppress certain aspects of development of thought. That's what actually comes out, that how certain people will lampoon on the others because of value neutrality or because of value ladenness. So this actually strengthens my argument that no, there is something more to understand in the sociological vogue, and development of sociology can take a different route altogether. Now this brings me to the second part. One was of course, this brings me to the second part. This is that if we want to construct a perspective, what are the characteristics which are very important and germane in the society where the perspective is developing? And is there a theoretical underpinning that we can develop a perspective which is suitable for that society, which can be definitely, which can help us to understand that society? And therefore I take, here 6 authors which will help me to evolve a perspective, and that is what I'm saying, that this is my Dalit perspective. 6 authors have helped me to frame this argument. First one is C. Wright Mills, and C. Wright Mills argues that social science deals with the problem of biography, history, and their interaction within the social system are the coordinate points for the proper study of man. Further, he also emphasizes that no social study that doesn't come back to the problem of biography, of history, and their interactions within the society has completed its intellectual journey. I think very, very important aspect that how biographies have been ignored, biographies of the researchers and biographies of the object to be researched. I think both biographies are important here. Biography of the researcher. We usually do not give heed to that biography. We think that, oh, everyone is value neutral, they are all researchers, they are objective, and they are producing knowledge. But I think biography becomes very important, and especially when I look biography of three founding fathers of sociology, Marx, Weber, and Durkheim, I'm even forced to think that yes, biographies are so important, because we know that biographies provide you social ecology in which production of knowledge takes place. Without social ecology, who is the opponent? What is the established thought against whom a researcher is fighting? You do not know. I think social ecology becomes very, very important. Therefore, biography, history, and their interaction. Similarly, I'm taking from Berger and Lockman. Berger and Lockman in their book Sociology of Knowledge, they have tried to argue that sociology is concerned with the relationship between human thought and social context within which it arises. Hence, sociology of knowledge constitutes the sociological focus of existential determination of thought. Existential determination of thought. I think, again, you can think of what is existential determination. That means biography and history again comes to that. But they have also tried to argue that you have to take note of history and philosophy both. You cannot only talk about history and you cannot only talk about, but interaction in society, that becomes a very important coordinate for the production of knowledge. The third proposition of my argument comes, this rationale for Dalit perspective comes from Bourdieu, and Bourdieu's concept of cultural capital. We all know that he defined cultural capital, that we have to reintroduce the concept of capital if we really want to make sense of the society, because social order for him is accumulated history. That's what he begins with. Social order is accumulated history, and therefore capital has to be reintroduced, and capital only one form, that is monetary form, will not help us to understand the reality, and therefore he goes on to give us two other aspects of capital. One is cultural capital and the other is social capital. Now cultural capital is further divided into three parts. One is cultural capital exists in embodied state, cultural capital exists in objectified state, and cultural capital also exists in institutionalized state. So these three clubbed together will create a very different type of capital, which can be used and later on converted into economic capital. I'm not going into that detail. You can look into if you want to. But one important point is very, very germane to understand, that for a perspective which I am trying to argue, is this, that the functionalist definition of education, or the functionalist definition of the function of education, ignores the contribution of the education system, because the functionalist will argue that the function of education is that it should emancipate everyone, it will give empowerment to everyone, it will definitely tell you, it will take away you from ignorance. But the functionalist theories do not tell about the reproduction of social structure. So, cultural capital theory of Bourdieu gives us that insight that there is a process of reproduction of social structure, and by sustaining the hereditary transmission of the cultural capital, this reproduction of social structure takes place. So you maintain your hegemony. You maintain your hegemony by only transference of cultural capital, and cultural capital in all its form. Now, the other form of capital is social capital. To rush this, social capital is again an aggregate of actual or potential resources of networks. And networks you develop because of neighborhood in which you live, or sometimes the college you go, or school in which you have been there. So that networks remain with you, and as the networks go away, or as you develop, that network also develop, and many things can be solved because of the networks only. Now, if you apply this particular model in Indian, so these three thinkers in Indian society, you will get something, a different picture. This I have published this paper, you can look into. You will get a simple figure of this. I can make if you want, but it's fine. So this is a simple way, Brahman, Kshatri, Vaishya, and I have given a space, and then come the ex-untouchables, because they are outside the Varna hierarchy. And above the three Varnas, they actually have accumulation of cultural capital, especially if we talk about great tradition, and that culture prevails, that, and people are devoid, they are excluded from culture capital. So this structure is basically based on the model, if you look into Bourdieu's cultural capital, production of cultural capital, and how the cultural capital is maintained. Now these three thinkers help me to bring out that how production of knowledge has taken place all these years, and how this production of knowledge has been kept alive, kept intact, and how hegemonies have prevailed, how reproduction of system has taken place and going on. That is one important aspect. Now, it is here that I bring in Professor T.K. Uman, and T.K. Uman tries to argue that the location of a researcher in the social structure, location of a social researcher has a bearing on the construction of consciousness. This is the researcher and its location. That's why I was time and again talking about biography. I have been since very beginning talking about biography. So location of a researcher in the social structure has a bearing on the construction of consciousness, out of which production of knowledge takes place. This is a simple proposition Professor Uman talks about. So certain people, they have accumulation of cultural capital, and certain people are excluded from cultural capital. And therefore there is a stark difference between the production of knowledge of the two types of researchers. One comes from the accumulation of cultural capital, and another comes out from the exclusion of cultural capital. This is one very important actually help which I get when I start constructing Dalit perspective. The second person which helps me is Paulo Freire. And in his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire argues that the pedagogy of the oppressed makes oppression and its causes objects of reflection. So, if there is a pedagogy of the oppressed, then it will definitely highlight what are the causes of the oppression. It will reflect. But the important point is that who will write the pedagogy of the oppressed? That is the question which he asks. It is not to be written by the oppressor. It will be written only by the oppressed. And oppressed has to emancipate the oppressor also. So a very powerful argument which I get that, look, there is a case for Dalit perspective. Otherwise, actually, why should I write? There should be someone to write. Last but not the least, I take, help from critical pedagogists also. I'm taking from Habermas, and this is an article which has written by Peter McLaren. Peter McLaren emphasizes that the critical theorists begin with the premise that men and women are essentially unfree and inhabit a world rife with contradiction and asymmetries of power and privilege. That is the beginning point. So we can look into, and we can of course observe our society, whether this is true or not. It is so simple. Further, critical educational theorists argue that knowledge acquired in a school, or for that matter anywhere, is never neutral or objective, but is ordered and is structured in a particular way. It emphasizes the exclusion of the exclusion with a silent logic. Not only that, if you take critical pedagogists, pedagogy tries to differentiate between three types of knowledge. One, it talks about the technical knowledge. There is a technical knowledge. There is also practical knowledge, the day-to-day solution. And last but not the least, the emancipatory knowledge. Now, emancipatory knowledge is one which tries to empower people, which tries to give them equality, which tries to envisage social justice. So there is this, argument. Now, taking these three thinkers for the oppressed and other three thinkers which I have taken to explain that how production of knowledge takes place, I come to my argument. That is there a Dalit perspective? Now, to begin with, I've written another article, How Egalitarian is Indian Sociology, in which I tried to highlight that after 100 years of Indian sociology, we have not been able to define certain population with its proper characteristics. We have tried to define, classes. We have tried to define male, female, gender. We have tried to define rural, urban. But within that category, I think we are not able to define certain population. Even tribes definition, you all know that people don't agree, that is debatable, and people do not have that. And therefore, there is no such definition of the Dalits as such. So I'm just trying to attempt this definition, taking some both empiricism and rationalism put together. I'm just trying to evolve this definition. A Dalit can be defined as a group which has following 6 characteristics. 1, the unique structural location. I have tried to show that how this unique social structural location, I am there and yet I am not. In this social structure, I am, for all practical purpose, I have been included. But as far as social interaction is there, I am not included at all. So we can argue that there is a unique social structural location. Second, there is cumulative exclusion. They suffer from cumulative exclusion. This exclusion is not unitary in nature. It is cumulative in nature, and I have tried to chalk out at least 46 types of exclusion which they suffer. The third is long history of exclusion. This history of exclusion is not, history is not a centuries old. This history is not, some 100 years old. Rather, actually, it is certain millennia. And fourth, it is unalterable social status of caste. Once a Dalit, always a Dalit. Even you achieve economic, educational mobility, you remain. The fifth characteristic is this: out of this long historicity, structural location, cumulative exclusion, there is this construction of consciousness which has, started mobilizing on its own. It cuts across the region line, it cuts across the caste line, linguistic line and boundaries, and people start identifying. And therefore, the sixth characters start emerging, that is the symbols. Greeting symbols or iconography, all this start emerging, and therefore they feel united. So Jai Bhim is more than enough to identify each other. And therefore, if you say this, then Dalits are different from tribals, Dalits are different from women, or Dalits are different from the poor people. So, and also this population, if you start analyzing, then if this is the population, then how is this production of knowledge takes place, and what are the ways in which production of knowledge has taken place? No doubt the education system, Dalit education, the Indian education system definitely tried to, they had education system, but the education system more or less, as I told you, that was more or less status quoist, and they did not develop a very critical faculty to evolve a very different type of sociological knowledge. Then what happened? There are certain individuals who started writing independently, and therefore a perspective started emerging from within. I call it as Dalit perspective from within, and this, if you see, it starts playing a role. Now, first, it tries to understand and analyze the existing socio-political reality about the Indian society. Dalit perspective, the role that it starts playing, that it starts understanding. The second thing it tries to understand is that how there's a difference between the field view and the book view. There is a difference between the field view of the Indian society and the book view of the Indian society. The third, it tries to understand the existing socio-political reality of his society, of his own society. And last but not the least, it provides a broad framework to understand the movement within the Dalit society, the way movement has taken place. So if you start looking at it, the way production of knowledge has taken place, I will take few examples to prove the point, and then I will stop, I think. One, if you take that the Dalits who have written themselves, I'm talking about the structural location of the researcher, the way they have started producing the knowledge, when they started writing it, how and what they started with. So, Ambedkar comes to the fore, and Ambedkar's production of knowledge, we all know when did he start. He starts writing and start publishing in 1970, just 2 or 3 years before Indian sociology formally was launched, and he publishes. And in Antiquary, 1917, his first article gets published in foreign journal, and of course that was presented in 1916 in US, in Columbia University. And his second article comes in journal again in 1918, and then his PhD thesis in 1922. So what I'm trying to argue, that this production of knowledge by Ambedkar was not written in an oral tradition. It was not written it was a verified knowledge. What you call as a canonized knowledge, it had a reference. And when I start looking Ambedkar, when I start analyzing Ambedkar's writing, I find 10 sources which he has referred when he has produced his knowledge. I'm not going into detail, but you can look it. He has archival references, he has archaeological references, he has census references, he has committees references, commissions references, he has paper clippings, he has also experiential thought, that's a different thing. But books and journals, of course, all this is referential knowledge. And then again, he starts refuting the existing theories. If you take caste as one of the examples, he begins by refuting Riesling. He starts refuting the anthropologist of that time. And then he propounds his own theory. So it's a dialogical way in which production of knowledge was taking place. Also, he applied at least 3 very important perspectives or approaches to evolve his knowledge, to produce his knowledge. One, he applied an evolutionary perspective. If you go and look into the way when he was trying to argue about religion, when he talks about religion, he brings in sciences of religion. He quotes Durkheim, he quotes Weber, he quotes Max Muller, and then he starts, analyzing how do we define religion. And he differentiates between theology and religion, and rituals. And then he says that, look, how many types of religions are there? He argues that, yes, Max Muller gives us 10 types of religion, but there are mostly 2 types of religions. One is book religion, another is revealed religion. And then, he talks about functions of religion. After that, he talks about difference between Dhamma and religion. And also, he compares Karl Marx and Buddha. So, I think he has a very meticulously designed approach, methodological approach to produce knowledge. Second approach, if you see, is historical approach. If you take caste or if you take social order, Ambedkar is very methodological. He begins by analyzing individual. How to define an individual. And then comes to Hindu social order. What is Hindu social order? And then also Hindu social structure. What is structure and order? And then he comes to origin of caste, origin of Varna. And Varna he is not taking only from Rig Veda, Purusukta, but he also takes reference of Atharveda. And then he tries to explain what is Varna. After that, he comes and explains what is caste. And within caste, he comes to explain what is untouchability, and he compares untouchability in the primitive society, in the ancient society, and the modern society. And he differentiates between, untouchability and what is the pollution. He differentiates between pollution and untouchability. But it's very difficult to look into that how people have ignored his theory of caste and Varna. Last but not the least, he employs a comparative perspective. Ambedkar is never actually trying to look into realities on its own in its linearity, rather it is in comparison. For example, when he tries to look into untouchability and slavery, Ambedkar compares the two. But for comparing slavery itself, he tries to compare Roman slavery with American slavery. It is not that he is directly looking at that. Even in revolution, Ambedkar is very categorical. He compares, ancient revolutions with the modern revolutions. He talks about when did Arabs became power, when did, even actually in India, when the Mauryans became power after Buddhist revolution, and then he comes to French Revolution, and within French Revolution he compares it with Japanese Revolution. what is the difference between the two, and then he comes to revolution against colonialism, which was led by Indians at that time, and how the elites have behaved in different parts of the world. I think a very, very methodological, comparative perspective Ambedkar produced, but it goes in vain, and therefore I think I begin by arguing this, that if we can take these examples, I think sociology will have a different perspective. Coming to the second genre of this, second aspect of this Dalit perspective, these are taken from biographies of the Dalits and how they write, how their biographies have deconstructed the existing concepts in the Indian society. One of the important concepts which gets deconstructed is Indian village with the solidarity and functionalist model. It stands totally vitiated. When I look and I start reading biographies of Dalits, you can begin with Jutan, you can take example of Murdaiya, you can take example of Apne Apne Pijre Mein, you can take example also of Mera Bachpan Mere Kandho, or my childhood on my shoulder. All these actually, I've done at least 12 of biographies I've taken from there to understand that how they depicted village. And of all, C. Parthamma started criticizing the existing perspective on the Indian village, and he wrote a very provocative article in 1978, The Remembered Village, a Brahmanical Odyssey. She was trying to criticize, M.N. Srinivas, and how M.N. Srinivas gives a solidarity model. And then she argues, and she also comes from Mysore, by the way. She also did her PhD under Max Gluckman, but she is nowhere seen. I think Tila would actually have a binary of Ambedkar and Ghure and M.N. Srinivas and C. Parthamma. It will be a very good binary because they both come from the same place, and they were trained in foreign countries. They were actually trying to do sociology, but how two are in blackout, two have been mitigated, forgotten, and others have become Donny. So you can understand why I'm trying to argue a place for the point is here that how production of knowledge on the village has taken place, and therefore I think there's a need to revisit. And I keep on talking about why it has happened. It has happened because of the locale from where the researchers have collected their data. And when Professor Andhra Bete had written Caste, Class and Power, 1974 edition, page 9, he writes that when I went to do my PhD, I stayed in Agraharam, a privilege. And therefore my data on Aditya Black colonies is scant. Had I stayed in Aditya Black colony, the focus of the research would have been different. But that difference still exists, that how that has not taken place from that locale. So the locale of the researcher and the production of data from there, is important. And therefore, these biographies become very important because their locale of production of data is totally different. The second institution through these biographies which gets deconstructed is the institution of Guru. And you know how Guru is hailed. Guru is hailed in Hindu mythology, how teacher is hailed in Indian society, and we argue that look, Guru has a highest pedestal. But when we start reading these biographies, I do not know from where these Gurus are born. Is it in India, same India? The way Guru, the teacher of Om Prakash Valmiki, asked him to clean the shit in the school. Directly, you are a chula and therefore you should clean the shit. That is your job to do. This is the Guru which we know. Guru of Murdaiya, Tulsi Ram's Guru, starts beating him, ask for 2 rupees, only then I will pass you. This goes, unrecorded. And Guru of Shivraj Singh Bechan, Guru asked that, don't worry, you keep on working in my home, I will look your attendance, don't worry, you will pass. But he says that, no, I have come to study, what are you doing? No, do my household job, I will take care of. And then actually, even the women autobiographies, the Dalit women autobiographies, and Sharmila Rege has written extensively on that. You can see that how Dalit feminist perspective have not been included in the development of the knowledge system, and in the classroom the discussion doesn't take place. So if you read Kumud Paude, and if you read Adyan by Usha Pava, I think she is trying to argue that how Dalit women then get triply exploited, and this is established again from the biography, and on the basis of occupation, on the basis of ridicules in the society which exists, and they get actually differentiated, but that has not been included in the sociological text, that how Dalit women gets is different from the upper caste women. Last point actually that I'd like to make is that you can argue a case that, look, we are all educated people, there is an education system, there is a curriculum, and after getting educated, we can emancipate ourselves from our primordial identities, from our primal locations. I agree with, yes, education gives us that power to emancipate ourselves. But we also know that education depends upon a curriculum. If curriculum is not emancipatory, if curriculum is reproductory of hegemony, then how can actually there will be an emancipatory agenda within the education system? And therefore, I think we need a perspective which will bring more realities of the society, and which will enrich the discipline from different experiential vantage point. I think that's what is actually, from me, a Dalit perspective can do. Thank you.